Great. Okay. All right, I'm just gonna let the other folks who just joined, let their audio connect, and then we'll get started. Okay, so welcome everyone. We are talking about why and how to teach listening. We'll focus on in an individual kind of one-on-one tutoring context, but a lot of what we're doing works for small groups, or if you have like a couple that you're tutoring together, it works great for that situation as well. Okay, so the overview kind of structure of what we'll do today, we'll start by looking at some listening challenges for English language learning students. Then we'll look at some listening sub-skills, a lesson plan outline, and then we'll explore a sample lesson plan and have time for question and answer. And then I'd like to just give credit that a lot of what I'm presenting today comes from TEFL.org. They have great teaching English as a foreign language trainings, and they have a YouTube channel where they have like live presentations. They're really helpful if you are ever interested. Any questions or needs before I jump in? Okay, so why are we talking about listening? Actually, about 45% of our time communicating is spent listening. Often, I think in a tutoring context, we kind of forget about listening, but it's the biggest, most of our time is spent listening rather than using other skills, followed by speaking and then reading and lastly writing. Okay, so I'd like very, very brief introductions. So if you can try to say, my name is, and the most difficult thing about teaching listening is, one sentence, please, so that we don't spend too much time. If you want to put your contact information in the chat so that other tutors can connect with you if you're feeling interested, you're welcome to do that. And that way we can network more. I'm going to stop shares so that it's easier for us to all see each other as we do introductions. So your name and one thing that's the most difficult about teaching listening. Anyone want to start? Otherwise, I'll just call on folks randomly. Okay, Anne, you're the first square in my, Anne Pukel, you're the first square in my grid, if you don't mind. You have to unmute. There's a little button, looks like a microphone.
Okay, sorry about that. It didn't want to work. I'm Kelly Leminski, and I would say the most difficult part of listening for me is I get so wrapped up in the conversation, I think I'm going to forget what I want to tell the other person. So I just want to barge in.
Yeah, awesome. That's very common. Thanks, Kelly.
And also trouble with unmuting. No, just kidding.
Great. And Anne says, I struggle to get my students to engage more regularly. Mm-hmm. Okay. Sharon Jerkup, do you want to go next?
Sure. Sharon Jerkup, and I'd say probably right now it's more technical. I'm finding with Zoom and being able to listen and hear, and sometimes having tiny little pictures on the screen to see enunciation and hearing and seeing that the student has the feedback enough on that is a little bit of a technical issue, I guess. But
yeah, that's great because we use visuals often to listen as well. Yeah, Jane Barnetsky.
Hi, I'm Jane Barnetsky. I'm new to tutoring. And I think one of the biggest problems with listening is you're so focused on what you're going to say in response, you don't hear what the person is saying to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those active listening skills are, yeah. Tom Pennenberg?
Yeah, The most difficult thing for me is I have hearing impairment. I've got hearing aids, of course, but sometimes I have to kind of guess at what people are saying.
Mhm. Yeah. Sue Sykes?
My name is Sue. I'm pretty new at tutoring, and the hardest thing about listening is just listening and then keeping things in context. So 'cause sometimes then you can figure out what they're saying.
Mm-hmm. Great. Lynn?
The hardest thing for me is, and I've been really trying to listen with all of my senses, not just the hearing, but also the, just listening what they're saying by their facial expression and body language and the whole works. So
Mhm.
that's it for me.
Yeah, great. Corey?
My name is Corey. The most challenging thing for teaching listening to me is assessing their comprehension. Like sometimes it's hard to really know
Mm-hmm.
when they're listening to me if they really understand.
Yeah, the smile and nod. Yeah,
I
Rod.
do too, I'm sure.
I'm Rod Mako, and I think the hardest thing for me is to make sure I give the student enough time to say what it is they wanted to say.
Mhm.
Trying to balance not making them feel like they have to say something, and at the same time allow them to say everything that they wanted to say.
Mhm. Yeah, that's, I think, a big challenge for tutoring. Yeah. Dale?
Dale Beard. I guess the hardest thing for me is the understanding the enunciations of their words and things. And usually if they're not quite as confident, they will speak even softer yet.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to really sit there and listen, and then you kind of try to make out the words sometime too, which it might be correct, it might be incorrect. But so,
Yeah, when people mumble, it definitely makes it harder.
yeah. Mhm.
Alicia?
Hi, I'm Ligia Rivera, and I think I have only worked with Spanish-speaking students, and the hardest thing is not to speak too much in Spanish in answer to their questions. So I can listen well, but I think it's keeping it in English is the part that I should do better with that.
Yeah, give them the opportunity to listen in English too. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's tough for sure. Miriam?
Yes, this is a great topic. Number one, getting students, keeping encouraging them to express themselves. I find reluctance frequently. Then when they are talking, to make sure I keep my mouth shut, because very tempting to pop in with an idea before they are completely done with their expression.
Riley?
Hi, my name is Riley Osborne. My hardest part of listening is very similar to Miriam's. I think allowing the student to finish their sentence, even if it takes them a little while longer, rather than, offering what I think they're trying to say. That's the hardest part for me.
Yeah, letting those silences be while the student works it out. Yeah. Victor?
I'm also a tutor at the Monash Public Library. The way that I'm teaching listening is to read them something, and I focus on Spanish speakers. I read them from a simple book. I have them repeat it, and then trying to analyze the translation into Spanish. First they repeat it in English, then they translate into Spanish. So giving them that time and judging whether or not the translation is correct. That's kind of the most challenging part, but I find it very productive.
great. Nicole.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to turn my camera off because I'm at work and this is my lunch break. So don't want you all to see me eating my spinach quiche for lunch. But I find that the most challenging part for me is similar to Rod's. It's that wait time, right? Giving them the time after I ask a question to really think about and process what they want to talk about and how they want to respond to it. So while we do have some free form conversation, I find it's also helpful sometimes to give them a prompt to prepare and think about so that they've had time to really wrestle with how they want to express themselves in English in a way that they feel good about. But even in those extemporaneous conversations, giving that wait time can sometimes be really hard without jumping in and trying to explain it in a different way or give them synonyms, because it's hard to judge if it's because they didn't understand my question or because they're thinking through how they're going to answer it.
Yeah, great. Melissa.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am brand new to tutoring, but I would say just from interactions at work and at home, I know that wait time is something that I need to practice to make sure that I am being a good active listener and not filling in those pauses with my own verbiage.
Thanks. Rick?
Good afternoon, everyone. I think I have the same ideas that others have mentioned, is that I have to try not to interrupt my student while they're asking the question, or I have in my mind already an answer that may not fit in with what the complete question is or explanation. So just try to hesitate and not just jump in with your ideas. Let the people finish. You know, it's good listening technique for everybody, for our students to listen and for us to listen as well there. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Judy? And anyone can put it in the chat if you prefer. Or if you don't want to participate, that's okay. I'll just wait a moment, and if you don't answer, then we'll go to the next person. How about Shirley?
I think Shirley Howard. I think one of the problems I have is maybe listening too much and not teaching enough.
Wait a minute. Yeah, thanks. Jennifer.
Hi, sorry, I don't have video. I'm Jennifer Cornett, and I'm brand new, so I literally have not started tutoring yet. Met my first student yesterday. But something that popped into my head was maybe cultural differences. Like I remember a friend of mine talking about how there are high and low context cultures, where like we're very, I think it's, if I'm remembering correctly, like I think Americans are very.
Yeah, that's a great point of one of the challenges for listening is, yeah, definitely. Yeah, thanks. Sheila.
Hi, I'm Sheila, and I guess to echo what some of the other people are saying, wanting to or feeling like I want to help them, and so having to wait, give them enough time. Sometimes, you know, I want to help them or correct their pronunciation versus just let them say and finish and then, you know, correct or whatever.
Yeah, that's tough. Anne? No microphone today. I'm listening though. Great. Jesse.
Also new to the tutoring world, but if I can relate my own experiences, I think the mental block of when you hear something that you don't understand, you stop trying to understand. So trying to encourage through that sort of confidence.
Yeah, that's great insight on how to help your student kind of stay engaged and present through those mental blocks. Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you everyone, and welcome to all of the new tutors. And it's great to see a lot of you who've been with us for a long time. Like I mentioned, if you want to put your contact information in the chat, you're welcome to do that. especially if you feel like, oh, somebody says something that, you know, maybe would be interesting or helpful to connect. Or you can reach out to me later and I can put you in contact directly if you'd like. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen again. Okay, so I'd like to think, what is the difference between reading and listening skills and writing and speaking skills? Anyone have an idea? You're welcome to unmute or put it in the chat. Okay, so reading and listening are receptive skills. So if I'm reading or I'm listening, I'm taking information in and making sense of it. Whereas writing and speaking are productive skills. So I'm having to take the information that I already know and then use it to communicate with others. So today we're focusing on listening. And it's hard because often when we ask, you know, what do we need to do to teach listening, or what's hard about listening, we often jump right to speaking. But they're quite different skills. They reinforce each other. And as you know, they are both necessary for effective conversation, which is one of our students, probably the top goal for our students, is to be able to have conversation. But listening is really a specific skill that's separate from speaking. And so we want to think about effective ways to teach listening, because that's actually how most of our students interact with English throughout their lives. So what are some of the challenges that ELL students face when listening? Again, you can put it in the chat or you can unmute. So if you think about your students, they're going to the doctor, they're going to the grocery store, you know, anywhere in life, and they're having to listen. What are some of the things that might make listening harder for students?
People speaking too fast.
Yeah, speaking too fast, for sure.
When you're learning a new language, it feels like they are at rocket speed.
Yes. Yeah. Corey says discriminating one word from the next. Yes, that is excellent. We slur our words together. Americans like to speak, we mumble, we speak from back here, not in the front of our mouth. And then we try to cut words so that we can speak quickly, and they all end up kind of blending together. And that's very confusing for people who speak other languages. What else? Yeah. People speak too fast compared to how I, as a tutor, speak to my student. Yes, that is great insight. Your student gets used to how you speak, and you're being thoughtful and adjusting so that they can understand and feel confident and effective in class. And then they go out in the world and people aren't making those same accommodations to be, you know, thoughtful and accessible. And yeah, definitely. What else?
I will
heard that
speak.
the use of slang is very confusing. So betcha, gonna,
Yep.
you know, or different idiosyncrasies and American sayings are very difficult for people to understand. They don't make sense.
Yeah, yeah. I beat you. What? Yes, Tom.
Well, the way we use words, sometimes the same word can mean something different.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So not being able to pull from the context what that word means, or being familiar with one definition of a word and not the new use. Yeah. English is confusing that way for sure. Anything else? Okay, those are some great.
One more thing I could think of is just different accents, you know, whether it's the East Coast, West Coast, the South, different accents are difficult for people.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. There's, you know, even locally in Wisconsin, there's regional accents that can be quite difficult. Yeah, so great accents. Speed, colloquial language, or idioms or slang. So students can get left behind while trying to figure out what a previous word meant. Homophones and sound differentiation, so new and new, for example. Register, so if I'm speaking in a formal context or I'm speaking more informally, Americans or people who speak English as their first language or fluently will get to a point where you're switching register based on the context and who your audience is, or you know, the role of the people you're speaking to, and that can be very confusing for newer language learners. You have less thinking time, because listening is it's moving along even if you're not ready, so have less time to process than if you're reading, for example. Pronunciation. Yeah, okay, great. So we're going to look at some sub-skills. So what are the important sub-skills to teach when we're helping our students to become better listeners in English? So the first one is prediction. So helping our students to start activating the vocabulary, the knowledge that they already have by imagining, okay, what might I hear? So that when they do hear things, it's less new, less unfamiliar, and it's already contextualized a little bit. And this can be tricky because if they predict incorrectly, they might totally misinterpret. But it's still one of the main skills, listening sub-skills.
Could you explain that a little more? I'm not quite sure I understand.
Yeah, and I'll look at each of these in more depth in a minute too.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So this, for example, for prediction, if your student is going to the bank, you might ask them, okay, what questions do you think the banker might ask you? Or what vocabulary do you think they might use? So you're starting to predict what English they're going to hear. And then listening for gist or for context. So that's just listening for the general idea, not for details yet. And then listening for detail is a different kind of listening skill. Listening for signposts. So signposts, if you picture you're driving down the road and there's an intersection, the signpost will tell you, which way to go. Same in language, that when we're speaking, we use signposts to kind of direct that now the conversation is moving to a new topic, or I'm going to elaborate on what I was just saying. So those signpost words can really help students to not get lost, especially in longer listening experiences. And then there are others. You can, if you Google listening sub-skills, there's others as well, but these are the ones we're going to focus on today. Okay, so let's look at predicting. So how do you choose what to listen to when you choose a podcast, for example? And you can just unmute or put it in the chat. Title, yeah. Title, great. Anything else?
The speaker?
Yes. Who's going to be speaking? Yeah, the tags, so what I'm interested in by the tags. Yeah, great. So maybe we use pictures, headlines, titles. Those are all part of predicting. So listening involves other skills, not just our auditory skills. And those help us to start kind of put our minds in the right mindset for the type of things that we might hear. So to help your students with prediction, you can give a picture that is linked to the audio that you'll listen to, or you could just give a headline or the title. And then you can ask them to imagine, what do you think we're going to hear about? Based on this picture, based on the title. What are some of the things that you think we might hear about today? You can ask, what words do you expect to hear in the clip? And then after listening, were your predictions correct? So part of this is really building some of those active listening skills and some of the kind of reflective, critical listening as well. Any questions about predicting still? Okay. So
And
similar
one
to
of
the,
oh,
yeah,
excuse me.
go
And
ahead.
one of the videos on YouTube that I saw they were talking about how, I think this is along the lines of predicting, you pick out the main words in the sentence that you hear, kind of like skim reading, it's kind of like skim listening, although obviously you can find yourself in the wrong direction. So you really need to be good at just understanding whether or not it's a positive or a negative and what the main words were in that sentence.
Yeah. Yeah. So you might give, like I mentioned, the title or, one sentence related to what you're going to listen to, and then have them focus on what are the key words and what do you think we're going to hear based on those keywords. That's great. And it's really helpful to build predicting skills in a way that connects to the real world. So for example, if your student has to go to the doctor and maybe they're nervous about it, maybe one of their goals is to be able to, go to the doctor and not use an interpreter. Interpreters are great, but can also be confusing. Sometimes they speak a different dialect of the language your student speaks. So a lot of the time, students want to be able to do things without interpreters. For other reasons as well. So you could ask them, what questions do you think the receptionist will ask you? What questions do you think the doctor will ask you? What vocabulary terms might you hear? What kind of information do you think they'll tell you? And having them prepare in this way, they'll discover, oh, I actually already know a fair amount of English. I already know some of the vocabulary. Oh, I already know some things about the context that will help me to feel less overwhelmed, more prepared. And they'll also identify, maybe where are some of their holes or misinterpretations or expectations of how our systems work that don't actually align with what they'll experience. And so predicting is really helpful for real world experiences. It's not just an academic exercise. So after predicting, then you want to listen for gist. So up to this point, we haven't actually listened to anything, right? We're just imagining, we're kind of brainstorming, getting ourselves in the right mindset. And then listening for gist is the first part in a lesson where you'll actually play an audio, or you'll read something and your student will listen. So listening for gist is just trying to understand the overall idea. So if you're going to listen to a radio podcast or something else that relies a lot on your listening skills, not so much on audio visual, what are some of the things that you do? What are some of the ways that you listen for the main idea? So Rod, I think you mentioned keywords. That's one example that you focus on. What are the keywords that maybe people are repeating? And you pull those ideas out. Any other thoughts? This is a little bit harder, more theoretical question.
First sentence to the first paragraph usually of an audio can give you a clue of what the rest is going to follow.
Yeah, that's great. So listening for the introduction and really focusing on how is the speaker preparing me for what they're going to say next. Yeah.
Thinking, listening for emphasis when the person speaks.
I can't really hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I have a terrible setup. Is this any better?
Yes.
I was saying listening for emphasis in the speaker's voice, because we tend to put emphasis on what we want other people to really hear and understand.
Yeah, that's great. So where does the speaker kind of emphasize, or where do they speak more loudly or more clearly? Where do they repeat? Yep, perfect. Okay, so those are skills that you can help your student to realize that they already do. Maybe they can do more of, and that you can help them to practice in class. Some of those active listening skills. So some ways that we listen for gist or context are vocabulary, tone, right? So if I'm speaking very formally, that's different than if I'm speaking in a very friendly way. Formality. So those give context clues about the topic, about the message. Before listening, give students questions. So if you're going to have your student listen to you read something or listen to an audio or a video on your phone or a computer, you want to start by giving them some questions so they know what to listen for. It's too overwhelming to just play something and then come back with the questions. You want to tell them what to listen for first. So for example, which is the best summary of the clip? And then maybe you give 2 very simple sentences. In the story, a boy and his dog went to the beach. In the story, a girl and her cat sat in the sun, right? So that gives your student a little preview and gives them a clue of what to listen for. Or you can give something that is more open-ended. So what is the topic? So your student knows, okay, I'm listening just for the topic. I don't need to listen for the details or for what happens first, second, or third. I just need to tell my teacher, what's this about? Are the speakers happy? Or are they sad? You can give questions to have your student listen for the experience and the emotions of the people in the story. And then after, ask your student the question again and ask them to tell you why. So what did you hear that tells you that they were happy, for example? Or why is the story about, why do you say the story is about a boy and his dog at the beach? What did you hear that tells us that? Any questions about gist or context? Okay. The next step is listening for details. So here you'll find more traditional listening activities. You're listening for specific words, numbers, times, etc. So not the general idea anymore, but for more specific content in the story. So when do we listen this way? Like when in life do you listen for a specific piece of information rather than just for the general idea?
Yeah, when you're asking about a time for a meeting or appointment or what things you should bring, documents when you're going to the DMV or something, something like that.
Yeah, great. Those are really important examples at work, at the doctor's office. People are putting in the chat.
When bad weather is predicted.
Yeah. I want to know how to plan. Riley says if I have to repeat the task on my own. Yeah, exactly. Listening for instructions.
Studying for the driver's test.
Yes. Yeah. Great. So we listen for gist and context, and we listen for details for different reasons, right? There's different goals for both of those different types of listening, and they're both really important, and we want to build those skills specifically. Listening for detail should always come after gist, right? Never start a listening activity having your student listen for details. That's not a very authentic way to listen. And it won't help them with accuracy, right? It's much more easy to misinterpret what we're hearing if we don't have the gist correct first. So some sample activities, you can ask, who, why, when, how many. So if you're going to play an audio, you could ask, who went to the beach? Why did they go to the beach? When? How many people did they talk to while they were at the beach, for example. You can give fill in the blank activities. So you might give a script of the audio and have words missing, and have the student listen and fill in the missing words. True or false. So we're going to listen to a story about the boy at the beach. We already listened to it once because we listened for gist. We're going to listen again. And this time, is it true or false that the dog got lost at the beach? Matching activities, right? So you have two columns. Maybe you're drawing a line, or you can, match things that happened and things that didn't happen. Okay. Any questions about listening for details or any other activities that you want to highlight?
How do you know when the student is ready for this, or you are trying to match the context of the video or audio to the student's level?
Yeah, so how do you choose the right materials, right listening materials? If you're using textbooks, some of them have listening activities built in with like the QR codes, so that's a great place to start. If you're not using the textbooks, or if you want additional listening, you can ask us, and I can, based on what I know of your student, I can send some examples that you could get started with. I'll also share some sites at the end that have resources by level. But some general guidance is 1 to 2 minutes maximum for listening activities, unless your student is very advanced. You can play things multiple times, right? If you're doing a listening for gist activity, maybe they kind of get it the first time, and then you can play it again and still have them just listen for gist. I would listen to the whole thing before you, show it to your student, obviously, and think about, how many of these vocabulary words do I need to teach my student before they'll be able to understand. Does it move too quickly? If it's on YouTube, there's a way to slow it down, and I'll show you that. Yeah, is that helpful?
One of the things I do is I ask, I play videos and ask, and part of the video asks the students to repeat what they've heard.
Yeah, that's a great way to comprehension check. That's another, you can do that for listening for details for sure, and maybe listening for gist, probably more of a listening for detail activity. Yeah, great. Thanks, Rod. Yeah. Okay, so listening for signposts or for signal language. So that's when we're speaking and say, okay, now we're going to talk about listening for signposts. I said, now we're going to, that signaled to you that we're switching topics, right? So teaching some of those words that signal to the student where the conversation or where the story is moving. This is an activity for higher levels. For students at lower levels, you probably don't want to choose listening activities that have a lot of nevertheless, meanwhile, right? Those aren't words that they'll know. So when you're kind of listening ahead of time and you're pulling out, okay, how many of these words are vocabulary words that I'll have to teach them before they can successfully understand this? Sometimes those are words that will tell you if your student's not more advanced, maybe to choose a different activity, unless that's the topic that you want to teach. You can teach nevertheless, meanwhile, in any case, you can pre-teach those and then use the listening as part of the comprehension check and part of your lesson. Signposts or signal language are very important for academic and vocational purposes. So if your student wants to go into higher ed in English, or if they have professional advancement goals, signposts and signal language can be really, really helpful for them to be more successful in their careers, especially if they're hoping to move into a more supervisory position. So if right now they're working in production and they want to be a line leader or a team lead or a team supervisor, then they'll probably need some familiarity with signposts or signal language, because they'll be giving directions. They'll be making reports about how the workload went during the shift, if there were issues, and use this kind of language for that. One way to find good signpost and signal language examples is by listening to more academic talks or talks that are educational. So some activities that you can have students write down phrases to show movement of topic. And you could do this, kind of pre-teach it with a reading activity and then with listening, especially if reading is easier for your student. So have them maybe write down these phrases, or you could give them, like I mentioned, a reading activity, not the same text that you'll do for the listening, but maybe a similar kind of text, and then have them underline, for example, moving on to firstly and conclusion. And you probably need to kind of teach what this means and why they're important, and then have them identify those words or phrases. You can give a list and have students put those words in order, and then use them in their own speaking activity. So, especially if you listen to a talk, you can do some of these activities with it, and then at the end, have them give a similar talk using these signpost words and phrases, maybe about a topic that they know about and is interesting to them that they'd like to teach you about. Okay, any questions? This one's a little bit harder. Okay. Okay, so we'll look at a sample lesson outline. So you want to start with some kind of lead-in. So show a picture or a headline from the audio that you'll play. You can ask some general questions. What do you see in the picture? What's happening here? Have you seen this before? Just general questions to get them activated in English, starting to think in English, starting to use the English that they know, even if it's not directly related to the vocabulary or the topic of the listening. And then you can ask them more questions to start predicting. So what do you think is happening? Is one example. So if you show a picture, what do you think is happening in this picture? Then you want to pre-teach the vocabulary. So before you do a listening activity, you want to listen to it all yourself and then identify the vocabulary words that will be new or difficult for your student, and then pre-teach those words. Show the title of the clip if you haven't used that already. And ask them, what do you expect to hear? So more predicting. And then have some kind of gist question, right? So like I mentioned, is this about a boy and his dog at the beach, or a girl and her cat in the sun? That might not be the best example, but just for example. Or, are the people in this story happy, or are they nervous, right? That would be a gist question, your just general idea. And then play the clip at least once. You can play it more than that, whatever your student needs, or you're getting the sense that they might need. And then have a detail question and play the clip again. Let's see, Corey says, what do you think this is mostly about? That is a question I have used for overall comprehension. Yeah, so what's the main idea? That I think is a great gist question, but I probably wouldn't start with that. I would start with something even simpler that doesn't require them to fully understand, And then you could have that as like a second round gist question. Yeah, that's great. Okay. And then you can do, like I just mentioned, you can do multiple rounds of gist and multiple rounds of detail. You don't want to ask a lot of questions at once. Help your student just by focusing on one or maybe two things at a time. And then you can end with a speaking or a writing activity using the vocabulary, using the form of the listening. Any questions here? I'll show you an example next, but any questions about this general structure?
So Heather, I have a question about my person is interested in learning to become a better reader. And I feel like a lot of these skills could translate from listening to reading. Do you agree? I mean, just that synopsis or outline you just went through of the headline, pre-teaching the vocabulary. I mean, it's the same concept?
Yep. The listening and reading skills use a lot of the same type of sub-skills. You can use the same lesson plan kind of progression for a reading lesson. Yeah, exactly. Yep, so you would just be reading for gist, reading for detail, and then having them do a speaking or writing activity at the end that's related to what you read. Yeah. Anything else? Okay, so we'll look at a sample lesson. So there are two pictures here. What do you see in these pictures? Anyone can unmute or put it in the chat. What do you see?
It's exercising or outdoor activity like hiking or something.
Yeah. Yeah, does it look like they're having fun, or are these painful, boring activities?
They're fun.
Yeah, fun. Right. Can you see where this is? Oops. You know, it's kind of hard to see behind them on the signs, but any ideas, any hypotheses where they might be?
Looks like the Appalachian Trail, if that's what AT stands for, but I don't know. Uhuru Peak.
The third sign says Africa's something.
Oh, Africa's, okay.
Oh, Kilimanjaro.
Yeah. So they're on some kind of high mountain in Africa, right? Hiking. Yeah, great.
It says the world's behind them. Africa's world's highest, so they're probably on Mount Kilimanjaro.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, so that's an example of a lead-in, right? These are pictures related to the listening we're going to do. You just ask simple questions to get your student to start talking, start thinking about it, kind of getting their mind in the right frame set. And you can ask other questions, especially if your student's goal is speaking, then you can say, you know, have you ever been hiking? Have you ever been to Africa? What would would you like to go? And you can stretch out your lesson and integrate a lot more conversation alongside the listening, since speaking is such a big goal for so many students. Okay, so then you pre-teach vocabulary. So here we have a phrase that says stuck in a rut. And then there's a picture here. Based on this picture, what do you think stuck in a rut means?
It's different than what we think as an idiom when we're speaking English.
Yeah. So then your student will probably say, I don't know, maybe your car can't go any further because the road is bad, right? They'll start brainstorming and trying to give you ideas of what this might mean. You might have to teach stuck. You might have to teach rut. So you can say, oops, the car is stuck. It can't go, and it's in a rut. So these things here, that's a rut. These kind of big indent is a rut. So this car is stuck in a rut. But you want to have your student try to discover what it means rather than you just saying, okay, stuck in a rut. Stuck in a rut means blah, blah, blah. That's a very boring and ineffective way for your student to learn. And then here it is an idiom. So you can explain, a lot of words or phrases in English have two meanings. One is literal. So this car is literally stuck in a rut. And another is not literal. So something that feels a certain way, but doesn't mean what the words mean literally. So I like to use I beat you because a lot of people have heard that before. So you say, if I say I beat you, it means I won. It doesn't mean I literally am going to hit you. So this is also an idiom, stuck in a rut. So let's look at the second picture. What do you think stuck in a rut might mean? What's the second meaning of stuck in a rut? Right, and then your student will give you their ideas, and then you can teach them what it means. And then I like to give example, use it in a sentence. So I used to be so creative, but lately I don't have any ideas. I feel stuck in a rut. And then the definition, doing the same things all the time, even though you want to change. And then have a comprehension check. So if you're stuck in a rut, do you feel inspired? And make sure that your student knows inspired, right? You might need to choose a different word. Make sure that they will understand the vocabulary that you're using in your comprehension check. And notice that if you're stuck in a rut, do you feel inspired is a yes or no question. You want your comprehension check to be very simple, and yes or no questions are best. And so your student, ideally, if they learned what it means, they'll say no. And then here's a second comprehension check. If you're stuck in a rut, do you feel bored? And then your student will say, yeah, probably. So you know, okay, they understood. If they say, if you ask, if you're stuck in a rut, do you feel inspired? And they say no. And then you ask, do you feel bored? And they say no. Maybe they didn't actually understand. So it's helpful to have two comprehension checks to make sure that they actually understood and they didn't just kind of guess correctly. And then you can build in some more conversation or more writing if that's their goal. So tell me about a time when you felt stuck in a rut, for example, or write one sentence using stuck in a rut. I'll send these slides as well if that's helpful. I should say that at the beginning and never remember to, so sorry. Okay. So when you're teaching vocabulary, you want to start with meaning, pronunciation, and then form, so the writing, right? So we started here with meaning, we have the pictures, and then pronunciation, so you would make sure your student repeats it and pronounces it correctly, maybe repeats it in the sentence. And then we are ending with writing it, right? So the spelling is the least important, and meaning first, pronunciation, and then spelling or form. Okay. I'm not gonna do this because you all, I think, know English well enough that we don't need to teach you flying by. But here's another one from the audio that we'll listen to. So here I have a little video. You can make it more fun and have little videos integrated into your vocabulary if you want. So the literal and the figurative meaning, and then the definition. Right. Comprehension check. So here, Maria hates math and she feels like the math class will never end. Does Maria feel like the math class is flying by? Antonio doesn't get to see his friends very often. When they do, they have so much fun together. He feels like the time is too short. Does his time with his friends fly by? Right, so again, yes or no questions for comprehension checks. And you just want to make sure that, these are kind of long examples. So make sure that your student is at a level where they can follow comprehension check. Shorter is better. And then When do you feel like time flies? So you can integrate that conversation again and make sure that they can use the phrase or vocabulary word correctly in the way that would be authentic and meaningful to them. Okay, so predicting, kind of lead in with the pictures or the headline, predicting. We pre-taught the vocabulary. And this is the title of what we're going to listen to. Try something new for 30 days. So you could have your student read it rather than you reading it, so they're doing a little bit more of the speaking. You could ask them, what are some of the things that you think we might hear about in a story called Try Something New for 30 Days? What do you think we might hear about? And maybe they'll say, I don't know, maybe somebody's gonna try to learn a new language and do hobbies. Thanks, Jessie. Hobbies. Remember the pictures at the beginning with somebody bicycling and hiking. Exercise. Yeah, great. New diet. Yeah. So your student will have ideas just like that. You could ask, do you think that the people in the story are have a lot of energy and are motivated? Or do you think that they're very stressed and tired, right? So questions to get your student kind of imagining what they're going to hear, get them in the right mindset. So a little bit more predicting. Okay, what do you think this story might be about? What kinds of activities do you think we might hear about? How do you think the person in the story is feeling? What do you think might have motivated the person to tell this story? So those are some questions that you would kind of discuss, brainstorm with your student before you play the audio. So listening has a lot of conversation built in the lead up to actually listening to the activity. So you don't just say, okay, try something new for 30 days and then play it. You have a lot of warm up to get them starting to think in the right context and kind of activating what they already know. Okay, and then you say, okay, now we're going to listen to the story. There are 2 sentences here. I want you to listen. Which do you think is the best summary of the video? So you'd have your student read these 2, maybe to you. You want to make sure that they understand these sentences. So you could say, what's the difference between the summary in 1 and the summary in 2? What's the main difference? Right? It's that he suffered a lot, or that his life is better, doesn't think it's a good idea, versus encourages others to try it too. So you want to make sure that your student understands your questions before you just give the question and then play the audio. Okay, so I'm going to play it, and I'd like you to listen for the gist. Okay, or simpler gist questions are, what is the video about? Does the speaker feel happy with his experiment? Okay, so I'm going to play now.
You can't buy love or happiness,
Sorry for
but
the
you
ad.
can invest in it with T.
Oops. I just accidentally clicked on it. Sorry. You don't want to learn about T. Rowe Price. I think it's loading. One moment. Let's refresh. Okay, and it actually might be that, I don't know if this is the problem, but some streaming do not allow you to share the video when you're on Zoom. And so that might be a new thing with TED that I wasn't aware of, that you can't play it when you're sharing on Zoom. So that's unfortunate. Let me just, yeah, it's either that or my internet is too weak to play it, which is usually not the case. But let me show you anyway that when you're on like TED videos or on YouTube, there's this little wheel here for settings, and you can choose the speed. So if it's a video that moves too quickly, you can slow it down. I would start with 0.75 because sometimes the text gets a little bit distorted if it gets too slow. And then usually you can activate the subtitles. And for listening, you want to listen without the subtitles first. If you have the subtitles there, your student will focus on their reading skills most likely rather than on listening. So you would turn the subtitles off, and then you would play it so that they can't read and they have to just listen. Okay, well, I'm sorry that we're not able to actually play the video. It's pretty fun and I thought you all would enjoy it because it kind of relates to tutoring, but that's okay. All right, so you play it. Then you ask, where are your predictions? Yes, thank you, Jesse. I will put the link in the chat. It's a short video too, so it won't take too much of your time. So you have your predictions, right? Here we asked, what do you think you're going to hear about? Do you think the speaker is going to feel happy? Here you had some predictions, right? And so after you listen, you want to check in. Okay, were we right? Did we hear what we thought we might hear? And then you're listening for detailed questions. So what new activities does Matt try for 30 days? So here your student is listening for specific vocabulary, specific ideas, not just the general idea of, Matt decided to try a bunch of new activities for 30 days and it went well. He's giving a TED talk about it, so he's probably not doing that to tell us that it sucks, right? And then you can have them just listen and take notes, or you can give a list and they could, check the ones that they hear. That's a little bit easier than just listening and generating their own list. So then you would play the video again and have them listen for those specific details this time. Here's another listening for detail. So this is a bit harder than the first one, the first activity where we're just listening for the types of activities that he tries for 30 days. Now we're listening for even a higher level of detail. So true or false, Matt thinks 30 days is the right amount of time to add or subtract a habit from your life. Right, that takes a lot more detailed and advanced listening than just pulling out, oh, hiking, oh, taking pictures, right? Or Matt felt less confident because of his 30-day challenge. Here, your student might have to listen to the general ideas and not just for specific words, because Matt might not say, I feel more confident because of my 30-day challenge, right? He might use other words or say it less directly, and then your student has to understand a lot more and then relate that back to your detailed questions. So those are more difficult, and you want to start with things that they can hear directly in the text and then move on to things that require more interpretation. An example of listening for signposts or signal language. So you'd play the video again after showing your student the question. Right? So which words or phrases does Matt use to connect one idea to the next or to move to a new idea or example? So you make sure your student understands the question that you're asking and that they understand what these mean. I like to give a list for signpost or signal language unless I'm working with a very, very advanced student. And then they're just listening for that and checking it once they hear it. And then you can end with a writing or a speaking activity that kind of pulls it all together and gives your student an opportunity to use what they listened and learned in their own words. So here's just one example of a writing activity. Write a summary of Matt's experience. And it's helpful to give specific prompts. If you just say write a summary, your student might write 2 sentences or maybe write some bullet points. So you want to tell them what you're looking for when you say write a summary. Include why he wanted to try this challenge. Include a sentence summarizing what the challenge was. Include 3 activities that he tried, 2 things he learned or ways that his life changed, and what his advice is for others. You also want to make sure that you're using the vocabulary that you taught in the writing or speaking activity at the end. So you're pulling that back in so that your student is getting more review and repetition in a new way. And then here's an example of a speaking activity. So pick one thing you'd like to try for 30 days and tell us about it. And when we say tell us about it, tell us what is it? Why do you want to try it? What would be most difficult? What would make taking on this challenge easier? What would be most rewarding or exciting about it? And you could give your student time to prepare their answers for this. Or you can have it more as a conversation where you would have these follow-up questions ready for yourself, and you could ask them, okay, what's one thing you'd like to try for 30 days? And then they would say, I don't know, biking to work. And then you would ask them these questions and they would think of the answers on the spot. You can do it either way. And that depends kind of on your student's personality and preference, how comfortable they are spontaneously speaking. And you could do either of these as a writing or a speaking activity. It doesn't matter. You could do this one as writing and the other as speaking if you prefer. Okay, any questions about the lesson plan layout, about the different skills, sub-skills for listening, about that example? Okay. So these are some of the resources that I think are really helpful for finding listening activities. StoryCorps has great short conversations, stories. They're a little bit longer usually. They have some that are animated, so that's really helpful for more beginner students because they get the visual along with the listening. And there are lots of great topics, so you can choose the topic with your student, so it's relevant to them. Then Learning English, Voice of America News, so those are news-based articles. ESL Lab has a lot of different kinds of listening activities. They have reading and writing kind of components that go along with it. And then News for You is another English language learner news site, and you just need this access code. We have a subscription. Does anyone else have favorite resources that you like, that you want to share with the group? When you teach listening, TED Talks are great, but you have to be very careful because they're usually for more advanced students.
If you had, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I use the NBC Nightly News for kids because then the parents can watch it with their kids.
Yeah.
And it's a nice way for them to have English in the home and practice conversing in English together.
Yeah, that's great. Some of the news-based things that are for children, the language is going to be simplified and they'll have more visuals, which is really helpful. If you want to use just regular news, The Guardian also tends to be written at a little bit more accessible level, and BBC are the other 2 sites that, yeah. Anything else?
PBS Wisconsin has a series of Wisconsin biographies of famous Wisconsin folks. It's
Yeah.
it's got a text as well as a video and some of the pictures from the person's life and the like, and vocabulary as well as questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are great because they have a lot of those teaching support resources already made for you. Mm-hmm.
Sharon, would you give us the name of that again?
It's PBS Wisconsin.
Thanks.
Sure.
Rod, you had one, right?
Okay, am I unmuted now?
Yes.
Okay. I was wondering if anybody had found any audiobooks for young children that might help early beginnings English speakers.
Mm-hmm. Audiobooks are a really good idea. I would just make sure that if they're for kids that you listen to it ahead of time and make sure that the topic is relevant and that they aren't using a lot of like silly, playful, whimsical vocabulary. Sometimes things designed for children are actually more confusing because they are more creative and descriptive in ways that adults won't really need to use or encounter very much in life. But yeah, children's materials that are designed to be more kind of concrete and on topics that are relevant for adults can be really helpful. I would go for like young adult rather than elementary age. Yeah. Tongue twisters. Yeah, that's a great like warm up or a way to just break up a lesson. It can be kind of lessons can feel long and heavy, and so having games or silly activities can be a nice way for 5 minutes to just break up the more serious academic study, and to not only have like small talk as your breaks. Getting away from small talk is sometimes hard, but can be helpful, make class more enjoyable.
A student is using a YouTube video. It's a collection from, I think it's Macho Camacho or something like that. It's a Hispanic name. But it's ELL videos, and apparently she loves them and has gone through a great deal of them. Pronunciation is very hard, the TH sounds. So somehow this particular video series had been hitting home for her, but she wants to practice more.
Yeah, that's great. If you think of it, you could share share the link and I can send it.
Yeah, I'll get you the specific because I don't remember right now what it was, but it's been working for her very well. I mean, these people are starting from scratch, never knew any English.
Great. Yeah, finding ways to encourage your student to do listening activities at home is really, really helpful because 1 hour a week with you is not enough. And so listening is an easy way that they can engage with English from home. And there's so much on YouTube that they can find, whether it's little classes that are video based or little stories, things that they can do supplement your class, because the progress will be slow if they only rely on your class. Yeah. All right, does anyone have any last questions or comments?
Yeah, this is Rick. I was thinking too that both speaking and listening involve body language and using our hands for things. And when we're in a classroom face to face, I can often look at my student and see if they're tired or if they didn't understand it. You can get the facial expression, and sometimes they don't want to ask that or something. So you can notice that, and then you can stop what your lesson is on and go ahead ask them, would you not understand that word or the meaning, or yeah, this is an English idiom, so I'll explain it some more. That kind of thing there too. So body language and using our hands. Most of us speak with our hands.
Yeah. Yeah, body language or pauses or changes in tone are really good indicators of whether or not your student is really feeling comfortable with where the lesson is going. Yeah, and those are things that they rely on too to understand. So sometimes having class on the phone can be really helpful for listening as well, especially if that's something that your student needs to do and finds intimidating, because phone calls in other languages is quite difficult. So that's another way to integrate a little bit more outside of class, that if you have like one 10-minute phone call a week, or you can send voice notes to each other, so like a text message, but it's a little voice recording, easier to access than a voicemail. That's another way to integrate a little bit of extra listening and speaking practice outside of class time.
Listening from my end, I use headphones a lot on Zoom so I can better hear if the student is pronouncing all of the letters that should be pronounced in a given word.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Working through those tech issues is really important, as we saw today.